Hey there everyone, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox and I am back with episode number 75 of the weekly Ratchet. I am also back from Orlando, Florida, where I attended the 2025 Dice Tower Retreat at the Caribe Royale Resort. I'm going to tell you all about the games I play there, all about some of the experiences I had there, and even a bit more. Let's get right to it here on the weekly Ratchet. Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 75, a very special episode as I recap my experience at the 2025 Dice Tower Retreat in Orlando, Florida. This is the 5th year that I have attended the retreat. This is one of my, it is my favorite board gaming event of the entire year. I get to meet up with a ton of people that I have met over the years, play a ton of games, some of them new, some of them old, new hotness, old classics, and everything in between. I've got a bunch of games to tell you about. Now, last year when I did this episode, I think it ran something like 2.5 hours in length, and there were a few complaints. It is this massive spike in the chart that I've kept track of all these episodes, views, etc. I'm gonna, for this episode, for this recap, I'm gonna break this up into 2 videos. I'm either gonna do a midweek video coming up here in a few days, or I'll just kind of recap the second half of the retreat in the next episode next week. Haven't quite decided how I want to do that. And I say that the second half, what I'm actually going to do, the way I've kind of organized this, I've got about 12 games to cover today, and it's going to be a combination of new games, some old games, big games, small games, some party stuff, and kind of everything in between, and I'm going to do the same thing in the next episode. So I'm going to kind of run through all 5 or so days of the retreat today and in the next episode. So you're going to get a nice blend of different games out of each episode. There is a ton to get through. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's kick off the show. All right, as always with the Weekly Ratchet, I'm going to tell you about some games I've picked up. Now, there was a big math trade. Actually, it wasn't a math trade, sorry. It was a virtual flea market that took place at the retreat. We had already sort of pre-sold all of our games. I took a huge selection of games on the retreat. I had 3 of the large all-play bags and 1 small bag and a couple of loose games because they were huge, like Andromeda's Edge and Cretaceous Rails. In fact, I got so much cash handed to me that I felt compelled to go to a local bank and deposit it so it wouldn't be sitting around my hotel room. It was a very, very successful event. Everything went off without a hitch. I only picked up a couple things from that, and I'll show you those. But first of all, I filmed the last episode last Saturday before I left for the retreat, and this game came in that day. This is Inventions by Vital Lacerda. This is a Eagle Gryphon Games game. I played this, ironically, at the Dice Tower Retreat last year. My good friend Matt Dixon taught this to us, a number of players. It was a very difficult game. It took us about 6 hours to get through that playthrough. One player in particular was just having a hard time kind of grasping the mechanisms, and so it did take a little long to play. I did enjoy it, although it didn't exactly feel thematic to me. But this game does things really in a way that I've never seen before. This has always been talked about. This game is always sort of touted for its combo actions, and it's doing something that triggers something else to trigger something else. And if you really, really time it right, you can just run through 6 or 7 actions in a single turn and make a ton of progress. I didn't really understand that until more than halfway through that experience. It started to kind of click. And by then, I wasn't really quite set up for it. So I always thought, man, this is a game that I could not necessarily get good at, but come to understand, it would probably help me be a much better gamer overall. So, Eagle Gryphon did a big sale over the Labor Day weekend. Myself and my good buddy Daniel bought copies of this to sort of save some money on shipping. And here it is. I think we're going to play it this week. That's the current plan. So maybe you'll hear about it next week. That is Inventions. Big thump. All right, at the virtual flea market, I got a copy of Black Angel. This is from, who is this by? I don't remember the name of the publisher. Pearl Games out of Belgium made this game, and the designer is Sebastian Desjardins, Xavier Jorge, and Elaine Orban. Illustrated by Ian O'Toole. I know that this is it's a sci-fi game. It's something about a massive colonization ship that's being operated by a bunch of sort of AI algorithms, and the AIs are trying to work together, or maybe not, to get this ship to its destination, awakening Awakening? Yes, the humans on board. I don't remember a lot about it. I just know that it was sort of a polarizing game in some capacity, but it always did sound and look kind of interesting. This is one that even Daniel was a bit curious about, so I am looking forward to getting to check this one out, but I have no idea when that's going to happen. Anyways, this is Black Angel. All right, up next in the math trade, let me get down here. Actually, there's only a couple little things that I got from the rest of that math trade. Here is Super Hot, the card game. Super Hot is a little video game. You can get this off of Steam. And it was a game, if I remember, because I think I played it one time, where everything happens in slow motion except for you. And as you run around, time progresses. So if you sort of stand still, time either doesn't move or just moves very, very slowly. And it's a shoot-'em-up combat sort of a puzzle game where you're trying to get shots fired off to take out hostiles. There's also a little bit of, if I recall, of a puzzle element where you're trying to sort of open doors and platforms and get to certain locations, while of course dodging bullets that are coming your direction. But you have plenty of time to stop and sort of see what's going on. But there are even still times where, you know, the place that you need to go to, there's a bullet heading to it, and you have to make sure that you avoid it. No idea how the card game works. I want to say it has some decent reviews online. It also plays, I think, 1 to 3 players. So I could check this out solo, and I got it for $2. So why not? Something interesting to pick that one up. Okay, up next, Juicy Fruits. Hang on a second, Jeff. You mentioned you got Juicy Fruits in episode 70 when you got a free copy from Capstone Games at the Gen Con convention. And you're right, I did. All that is true. However, I was told by some listeners, I even saw online in some other places, that the expansion to this is supposed to make it a pretty good game. I was keeping an eye out for that expansion. It was about $18, $19 or so online, plus maybe some shipping. But I got this copy for $15 in the virtual flea market with the expansion. And now I have an unopened copy of Juicy Fruits that I can offload next. So that's why I got this. Still haven't played it. It is basically the last game that I have not played yet from the Gen Con haul, but I am looking forward to checking this out. I'm sure I can get my family into this. It doesn't look to be too complex. So hopefully that will happen fairly soon. There were 2 things, and I think one thing went missing. I did get some promo cards for the Windmill Valley game. Not sure where they went to. And I did get the Ark Nova Zoo Pack number 2. Haven't played Ark Nova in quite a while, but I have everything else for the game except for that crazy new 3D printed expansion thing that's out there on the internet. Not going to deal with that. I just didn't have this pack, so I grabbed that as well. Okay, that is it for the virtual market. Also, before I got down there, I almost forgot about this. I picked up a copy of Nucleum. And at least 2, if not all of, the current expansions. This one is Court of Progress, and this one is Australia. Both of these are expansions for the base game of Nucleum. Now, I've played Nucleum before, and I've talked about it here in the channel that I'm not a huge fan of board and dice games, but I am kind of a fan of power generation themes, as that's the sector that I work in. I did play this once. It wasn't a great playthrough. There was someone at the table who was making it really, really hard for the rest of us to progress in the game. It was kind of an intentional move. I get it, but it made it kind of not fun for the rest of us who were new to the game. However, my good buddy Daniel and I have chatted about this a couple times. I did generally sort of like the systems. Yes, it has a little bit of a Brass Birmingham kind of a note to it, which is not my favorite game. But I did like this one better than Brass. And of course, I'm a bit of a collectionist, so here I have the expansions. Anyways, hopefully, again, we'll get to check this one out as well. Just not quite sure when we will get to Nucleum. Lastly, the last thing that we do there at the retreat is we have a game exchange. People bring in games and put them on this big table, just covered with tons of games, and then they call you off one at a time, and you get to go up and grab some stuff. Now, I got called pretty late this year, as I have in most of the years past, and so there wasn't a great selection when I got up there. However, I was quite surprised to find this unopened copy, what appears to be a Kickstarter copy. There's a tiny Kickstarter logo in the corner of How to Save a World. This is from Burnt Island Games. There is a preview video of this game on this channel. I think it has all of like 60 or 70 views last time I checked. I don't know what happened. That video just did not get an audience at all. And as a result, not really necessarily as a result, but I just never really quite pushed Burnt Island to get myself a copy of the game as I usually ask for. in exchange for my content. I kind of let that one slip through the cracks. But this one was on the table. Like I said, it's unopened. Appears to be a Kickstarter edition. I did like the game, and I also know that there had been some tweaks to it since the version that I actually still have sitting on one of the shelves behind me, so I can go ahead and finally get rid of that. There's really no sense in keeping or trying to sell or pass along a prototype game. I feel like that's not really fair to the publisher. But now I have a full-fledged copy of the game. Also, I got called later to go up and grab another game. There were even slimmer pickings that time. And so I picked up Migration Mars. Never heard of it. Never heard of it. Never heard of the publisher, which is Enhance Games. The designer, no, that's right. The designer is not credited, even on Board Game Geek. There is no actual listed designer. However, the back of it shows a bunch of miniatures. There's a hex-based sort of a grid system, lots of little pieces and components, some dice. I don't have high hopes. This only has like a 5 on Board Game Geek, but I have certainly learned that every man's trash is someone's treasure. So who knows? I'll check it out. I'm sure at some point, maybe. That is Migration Mars. And the last game, you're going to chuckle at this one, is the Nature Flight module or expansion. Now, again, Jeff, you said in the last episode that you played Nature and you were very, very disappointed with it. And I did. And I was. And I got this for free because it was just sitting on the game table, on the exchange table, along with some other stuff the Dice Tower themselves were trying to get rid of. And so I just grabbed this on my way out the door. It helped that I drove, and I could just carry as many games home as I wanted, which was pretty nice, if not a very tedious 20-something hours of my life that I won't get back. Anyways, I know that this is the first module. It's module number 1. And it's really, as I recall reading, it's supposed to be kind of the first thing that amps up some of the difficulty and thinkiness of the game. I don't really plan on sinking any more money into Nature, but I would like to try and play it with some of these modules mixed together to see if it makes it a better experience, even if it does come at this sort of cash grabby modular play that doesn't really need to exist in the first place. Anyways, like I said, went ahead and picked it up because it was there, and maybe I'll get a chance to check that out. That is it for new games, and so it's time for Question of the Week. Running with the theme of the Dice Tower Retreat, I thought it'd be fun to ask you, if you were to meet me at some sort of an event like the Retreat, what would you like to play? What would you recommend playing? Or what is something that I have mentioned in the past that you would really like to check out? I thought this would be a fun idea to kind of, again, celebrate the Dice Tower Retreat event. Some folks mentioned a variety of games, starting off with Jeremy Brooks, who said he'd like to go for something a little chunkier, mentioning Luthier, SETI, or Galactic Cruise, adding, so who's heading across the country first? I have now played all of these games, including Luthier, which I won't get into, I think, today. I think that's going to be in the next episode. Of course, SETI and Galactic Cruise I've mentioned here a couple times. And I've been thinking that at some point I'll probably be back over in Indiana to meet up with my friends Katie and Greg. And maybe at some point I'll have to just venture another couple of miles to get over to Illinois. We'll see. Maybe at some point here, sooner than later. Up next was Viper86, who said he'd want to play something that he's had a hard time getting into, like Anno 1800, Merchants and Marauders, or Star Trek Ascendancy. I'm always up for a game of Anno 1800. Merchants and Marauders I have never played. I think I would really like it. I know it's kind of in that Zaya sort of atmosphere, a very open world, kind of do whatever you want kind of game. Sometimes those can be really difficult to learn, as you've kind of alluded to, but I haven't had a chance to play it. Star Trek Ascendancy is one of those games that on paper looks really interesting. I've played it a couple times, and I've just never really had a great play of it. I feel like it's a game that's just very difficult to explore. And I don't mean physically exploring across the board, but exploring all the different mechanisms of that game. Again, like there's all these technologies, there's things you can research, there's things you can improve and make your whatever culture, civilization, whatever you're playing as, more interesting, more powerful, more capable. But it almost quickly just devolves into running into each other and trying to just expand and get the resources, and you never really seem to get done the things that you want to or feel like you should be able to get done. So I would definitely lean on the left side of those 3 games. Up next was Wayne Kruger, who said he thinks we both have fun playing Brewcrafters. That is a neat reference or a neat suggestion. I have not played my copy of Brewcrafters now in a while. I have played it here in this room, but it's been quite a while. A fun game. Definitely one that I would love to sit down and play with again. Up next is Teshra, who speculated that I might be an interesting and fun person to play with. Not sure where you got that idea from. And so he'd want to play something that would lead to some laughter while still having some strategy, suggesting Moon Colony Bloodbath. Of course, he added, it's a space theme. So I had to look this one up. It is a 2025 game. I can't believe I haven't heard about this one at all. It's from Donald Vaccarino, whose name I now recognize, folks. It looks kind of interesting. It does seem it might have like a little bit of that random chaosy stuff. I don't know, but I definitely think this would be one of those games where, and I saw this at the retreat too, it definitely matters who you play those kinds of games with. They can still make them a lot of fun. Rentless mentioned Scorpius Freighter as a game that flew under the radar and suggested I might like, describing it as a Euro with some rondel mechanisms and also space-themed. Not sure what it is with everyone thinking I'm into space-themed games. Oh, that's right. Well, anyways, this is a 2018 game, and I see that it's about upgrading ships. You do have these kind of plastic miniatures. Looks like they're moving resources around. Definitely something I think I would be up for checking out. Wonderflonium said Age of Atlantis, as he's always up for trying out other people's favorite games. I almost grabbed this one off the shelf at the retreat. They do still have it there. On I think it was Sunday, which is the reason why I really didn't, because it's a difficult game to teach. There really is a lot to it, despite being a relatively easy game to play. And so I didn't want to soak up my entire Sunday because I only had a handful of hours. I didn't want to just sit at one table playing one game with some people. I wanted to try and be able to jump around just a little bit, play some shorter stuff, and get a chance to say goodbye to folks. So I almost got to play it at the retreat, but I didn't quite get around to it. Tony Lawhorn said he'd also like to try Age of Atlantis, having bought it on my recommendation, but also said he'd love to introduce me to his number one game, Nippon. Now I had to look this one up. It's a 2015 game and has to do with Japan's Meiji period, I believe is how it's pronounced. And it's interesting, I've played a number of these sort of ancient, especially ancient Chinese games. I haven't seen a whole bunch of ancient Japan type games. Of course, there's Let's Go to Japan, but that's set in the more modern time frame. But it looks pretty interesting. Definitely a Euro-y, good amount of brown there on the table, but it looks pretty neat. CR Poll listed a few ideas such as Backgammon, Ticket to Ride, Raw, or Tilatum. I have never played Backgammon. I have no idea how to play Backgammon. I have had probably across my life 4 or 5 copies of Backgammon because it's always bundled with, checkers in some sort of a little toy or something that you might get. And so I had a copy of Backgammon, also Chinese checkers, which we never played the correct way. But yeah, no idea how to play Backgammon. Ticket to Ride, a great game. I do kind of feel like nowadays there's just, better Euros out there. Ticket to Ride is kind of, I don't want to say it's been superseded, but people have sort of taken that idea and run with it in new ways. Raw, I don't think I'm up for playing Raw ever again. I am just that whole bidding system, especially just bidding for set collection. I was never really good at, and I certainly haven't really enjoyed. And the last play I ever had of it a couple years ago at the Dice Tower Retreat was a terrible playthrough. Tilatum is another one of the Board and Dice T games. I've only played a couple of those. Of course, I'll talk about Board and Dice not being one of my favorite publishers, but I'm usually up for trying them. In fact, I did play another T game this past week, and I'll get to that one here in a little bit. Backgammon, that might have to be the one that we check out together. And lastly, Derek said he'd start with Crokinole, giving us something fun to do while we discussed our next game to play. Now, Derek, I know you're from Canada. Here in the U.S., man, we're pretty aggressive with our Crokinole. Especially my wife and I. Man, there's no time for chatting because it's just vicious murder at the Crokinole table. But that does still sound like a fun idea. So, a great conversation, some really great answers. This was a lot of fun to read through. There are definitely a couple of games that I like to resort to when I'm at the retreat, especially if we've got some larger groups. I learned of some new ones even this week that I will be talking about. Some games that I think would be really fun to play with some of you. All right, here we go into the Dice Tower Retreat. I didn't get to play any games before I left, so everything I'm going to talk about today, I played either in Orlando, at least, or specifically at the retreat event. I got there Monday afternoon. The retreat didn't really start until Tuesday evening. So these first couple of games, I got to play with my good friends, Katie and Greg Barley, also known as the Meeple Society, shown here, fulfilling their roles as my mother and father. I joke that Katie especially reminds me so much of my mom, and the two of them together in their little bickering and squabbles and such reminds me so much of my parents. Had a great time, of course, getting to hang out with them. I think sometimes we grated on each other's nerves. Katie did not hesitate to tell me that I needed to clean up the dishes a little better in the villa that we stayed in, which I just thought was funny. But we still had a great time getting to play some stuff together. And the first game that we played was Ink. This is from Final Score. The designer is Casper Lapp. Now, I've heard a little bit about Ink. This is a review copy provided by Asmodee, so I will be doing a more in-depth look at this game here in a little bit. But this is an abstract tile placement game. You're building your own little painters, or your own little portrait. I don't know what it's supposed to be. You're just laying out these tiles in front of you and trying to combine colored areas so that you can then score them. Some of these tiles will have little spots on them, maybe with a number, maybe just blank. And what you're trying to do is get a large area of each of these colors that has one or more numbers on them. And then you're taking these little ink wells that you have, you're placing them upside down on top of the spots that have a number. That number has to correlate with how many squares you have of that color in each, contiguous area. And then there may be other blank circles, which if you score one area that has a numbered and non-numbered areas, you have to put one of your inkwells upside down on the number and right side up on the blank spaces. You do that by drafting these tiles from sort of a central circular board, which at first is really confusing because it basically says you can take any tile you want, but you're specifically moving your selection marker clockwise around this board. And we're like, well, what's the point? Why can't I just take one? Well, because every time you pass the starting position on this board, you have to take a blocker tile, which is randomly chosen from a bag. So you don't know what you're going to get, but it's going to have a color on it. And you have to start blocking off those colors on your board, which could, of course, make it very difficult to then score something that you were working on trying to score. The entire point of the game is simply being the first to run out of your inkwells. And there is also this sort of interesting mechanism where you get a card at the beginning of the game that shows 2 of the 5 colors that are in the game. You're going to put half of your inkwells on this card, the other half just sit next to it. And specifically, because there's 5 different colors in the game, the inkwells that are not on that card are the ones that you must use to place on colors in your tableau that don't match the 2 colors on that card. So for example, I had kind of like the dark blue and the purple colors on my card. The other colors I keep forgetting, there's a light blue, there's a red and kind of a yellowish peach color, and then yes, a light blue, a dark blue, and sort of a purple almost, or very, very dark blue, which was a little confusing if you're maybe colorblind or just difficulty seeing colors. I could see this game being a bit difficult to play, but again, so I had the sort of the dark blue and the purple. So anytime that I made a pattern out of those colors, I could use my inkwells from that card. And whenever I made a pattern out of the other colors, I had to use the inkwells that were not on that card. And so you want to try and time things carefully, because if you just build a whole bunch of, in my case, if I did a whole bunch of reds, I would run out of the one supply and not out of the other. So you're incentivized to use the full variety of colors in this game. And all of that was fine. I thought it was a pretty decent game. Because of because of it being so abstract. It was a game that didn't necessarily jump out at me like, oh my gosh, can't wait to play this. In fact, as I was taking these notes, I kind of forgot that I had played this. But it was a fine game. I think if you're into that abstract puzzle, I also think it's nice that there isn't scoring that you have to worry about. It's just the first person to run out of inkwells. You do finish out the round, so if multiple players would run out, and if you would score more spaces than you have inkwells in your supply, you then start using this supply of black or sort of wild inkwells. And so then it would be the person who had the most of those black inkwells in their painting that would then win. I managed to win this one, which was nice. Katie was like one turn behind me. And in fact, she was hovering her hand over the tile that would have let me win. and I was afraid that she was going to hate drafting, although she wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. And it's kind of hard to. It's a little difficult to see, well, no, you're about to get that, you're about to get this, because you can't. I mean, you can tell if you really want to sit there and analyze someone's play area, but the turns are pretty snappy, so you're not really going to have a lot of time to do that anyways, unless you just want to. Anyways, it was fun. It was a good game to play. I think I'll be able to speak relatively favorably of it. Again, just that abstract nature is not my most favorite thing to do, but I can see this being a popular title for sure. That is Ink. Up next, again, this was Monday night. We played Big Sur. Katie and Greg had a copy of this. I've talked about it a couple times here already on the channel. And this one was kind of fun. I've never played it at more than 2. So I finally got to see it at 3 players. And it's still a game with nice, quick, snappy turns. It plays, very quickly. There is that sort of idea of the cards coming out when you need them. I don't think we had as much trouble with that with the construction cards. These are multi-use cards. You're trying to build a highway in front of you. If you want to get a card played, you have to use other cards as costs, but it's not just, discard 5 cards, build this card. They actually have to have matching symbols. Each card has a card or a symbol on its backside of, a hard hat or a steel girder or rock or something like that. And so you have to be able to discard cards with those matching symbols to meet the cost of the cards you want to play. But then there is some of these cards will actually generate resources. You may have other ways to get sort of generate resources on each of your turns. And eventually you can get to the point where you're playing maybe even 2 cards on your turn and not discarding anything, which is interesting. It's kind of neat to see that engine build up. What was fun with this one is that Katie and I tied at the end of the game, which I'd never seen before. And the tiebreaker goes to the person with the shortest overall highway, sort of implying that, hey, you managed to get that same score with less cards, arguably a little bit more impressive. And so she did win the tiebreaker in Big Sur. That was it for Monday. Tuesday started off with a huge game. On Tuesday, after some breakfast and a quick run to the grocery store to get some stuff I had missed on Monday, I sat down, taught, and we played Zoo Tycoon. This is from, the publisher is Triceratops, not Triceratops. The designer is Mark Durr and Samuel Lutherbacher. This is, I don't even know where to start with this thing. Obviously, it's based on the video game Zoo Tycoon IP. In fact, there is on the back of the box, I believe, an Xbox logo as part of that sort of IP, copyright, whatever. This, I made a post on social media after we played this that it makes Ark Nova kind of look like Candyland. And it's not to say that Ark Nova is a bad game. I don't think Ark Nova is a bad game at all. They are completely different games with just a very, very similar theme. And I can't even begin to cover everything that you do in this game, but you are building a zoo. You have a large board in front of you arranged into squares. What I thought was really odd is that the squares are larger than the tiles that you're placing in them, and that is apparently on purpose so that you can kind of group together tiles that form different enclosures for your animals and sort of clearly denote pathways between those different enclosures, kind of help you see where your boundaries are for the areas that you're building for these animals. There are something like 300 meeples in the box for this, and there's so much that I just have the lid here because of how heavy that box is, and it's not really built for vertical storage or sitting here on a table. But anyways, you've got male and female of a bunch of different animals, and you'll be placing them into their enclosures of appropriate biomes. You have 3 different biomes. I'm going to try to remember them all. There was rainforest. There was sort of Amazon, rainforest, a desert type tile, and then what was called montane, which is actually a type of forest, a specific type of forest. And each animal wants to have a certain environment. Each animal wants to have a certain number of animals in its group. Some animals want to cluster. Some animals want only 1 animal per hex or per square tile. Some animals want to have a certain number of open tiles. And some animals are interested or not interested in living with other species of animals in their environment. So in addition to these meeples, you also have a couple of tiles. I think there were 9 different what they called co-species or cohabitant, something like that. And there aren't meeples for these. There's just a tile, and you have to place them over top of the biome tiles of that enclosure, and that represents another animal, usually a much smaller species, some sort of a bird or maybe a rodent or just a smaller animal that is living with those other animals. And you get these animals, unlike Ark Nova, where it's a matter of drawing cards and trying to get the species that maybe you're looking for, getting the tags that you're looking for. In this game, it sort of represents this idea of a global zoo market. It claims, and I don't know that all of this is true, but zoos don't sell animals to each other. They trade the animals with each other. And so there's this massive board with a sheet that lies underneath it. The sheet is just covered in symbols in these grids, and then every round you move this board around, making sure to never visit the same spot on those grids twice. And that establishes the either supply or demand of any of these animals in both male and female genders. And so if you're trying to get lions, you move that board and you find out that lions are in demand. There are none available, for trade. You just can't get any lions that round unless yours that you already have happen to mate. But they won't mate unless you've met all those requirements. So if they have to have, a certain number of tiles, they have to have a certain number of what they called retreats, which I thought was kind of funny, but basically little huts within their enclosures that the animals can go to sort of get away from, human observers. And you have to have all these requirements met, and if you do, then the animals will become very happy, depending on their happiness level. There's actually 3 happiness levels for each animal, and based on their happiness level, they will or won't attempt to reproduce. You may get better results or more likely results of reproducing based on the level of each animal's happiness. And that was a lot of words, right? There's so much in this to manage. Even just describing it probably as poorly as I already have made this game unbelievably heavy. Now, each of these animals, you have your own cards. You have a card for each animal. So again, it's not necessarily a matter of, can I get the card out of the deck, but is that animal available on the market? If it is, then you just take one of your cards, you play it in front of you. You can actually stick a couple of animals in quarantine. You may not be ready to get them into play in that round, but you hopefully can get a enclosure set up for them and move them in a later round if possible. And all that was really fascinating. Now, there are 3 different scoring tracks on this. You have a happiness track, which is tracked for I think more really for your animals than it is for your guests. You have a education track, which is how much information you are sharing with your guests to help them learn about these animals. Each animal has a sort of a learning value, and you can build little kiosks in your enclosures to help people be able to learn about those animals. It helps move you up that track. And then there is a conservation track. Again, just like Ark Nova, there's this idea that it's not just about making a nice zoo. It's about actually contributing to the global efforts of keeping these animals alive, keeping them from going extinct, helping to help people, understand these animals, and so on and so forth. We found that going up the happiness track was pretty easy. The knowledge track was relatively easy, but the conservation track was really, really hard to climb. And at the end of the game, it is the lowest of the happiness and the conservation track that becomes your score. So all of us had a pretty decent happiness rating, but we all had pretty poor conservation ratings. It was just very, very difficult to get. And one of the concepts of this is that there are 3 different levels of animals, just kind of like your level 1s, level 2s in Ark Nova. There's a 3rd level in this, and you cannot acquire any animals from the market of the next level unless all the animals that you already have are at a happiness level. They have to at least be somewhat happy. And one particular instance that I had with this was that I was starting to collect some lions, had some very nice little lions. I happen to like lions. And they needed 5 animals, 5 lions in their enclosure to be happy. Each animal also has a rating, not to go into more details of this, but each animal has a rating as to whether you can have multiple males or maybe just one male, or, can you just co-mix genders? Lions are a, sort of a pack animal, and so you'll have one dominant alpha male, and then you can have as many females as you want. But if you have multiple males, then of course they will clash. And so I had one male, I had, I think, 3 females. I needed one more to make this pack of lions that I had happy, and none came up in the market by the last round. And so I was not able to make them happy. Therefore, they would not breed. Therefore, I could not get any level 2 animals. And the level 2 animals is where you start to get more of those conservation values. And so I kind of hit a point where I was just locked. I could not progress in the game. I couldn't really do anything more. I had to just sort of make do with what I had, which was a challenge, and that still sort of presented some of that luck that you can run into with Ark Nova, which was a little frustrating. However, I liked the game far more than I thought I was going to. I have not heard a lot of good feedback on this game. It is incredibly heavy, very, very heavy, something like a 4.3 on the Board Game Geek scale. I watched a full video, which was only slightly helpful. The rulebook, I do have the new version of the rulebook. They came out with a new one with the expansion. We did not play with the expansion because it is the same size of this box. But we did like it. We did have fun with it. The rulebook was still not amazing, but I did manage to find most of the information that I was looking for. And we did have a good play, but the biggest bummer is that we didn't get to finish it. We went through 6 rounds of this thing. I think it took us 4 hours. We had one more round to go, and the retreat was about to start. And so we were going to go ahead and head on over and start meeting people and all that kind of stuff. So we did end up a round early. I wonder if Katie could have passed me in that last round since I was kind of stuck, but maybe I could have gotten more lions and kind of helped things. I don't know. Anyways, that was Zoo Tycoon. I'm hoping to get to play this again because I did enjoy it. And it looks like the expansion ups the difficulty even more. I don't know if and when I'm going to get to that, but this was a pleasant surprise, if not a very big, challenging, long surprise. Zoo Tycoon. Okay, that was it for Tuesday. I'm going to talk about the games we played later on Tuesday in the next episode. Then we got into the full-fledged Dice Tower Retreat. Now, I mentioned that Tuesday started off the retreat, but it was sort of a punt kick. They only were open for a few hours, like 7 to midnight. We got one game in. I'll tell you about it in the next episode. But the official start was sometime around 5 a.m. on Wednesday. That's usually when Tom Vassell gets his day going. We showed up a little later than that, and I got to meet up with Colin Purcell. I've met Colin, I think, 2 years ago at the retreat. Just really love the sense of humor of this crazy guy. A huge Oklahoma fan. I don't really know anything about that, but it's totally fine. We sat down with him and Katie and Greg to play Gilded Realms. This is from Sandtime Games, or Sandtimer. I can't remember exactly their name. I can't remember the designers' names either. But this was a first time sort of a self-published game that came out, I believe, at least a year ago, or I think it was on Kickstarter a year or so ago. In fact, I remember talking about it on this channel before I had even backed it as part of the Ratchet. And I have a $2 pledge out there, which I just never decided to upgrade because there was one particular component of this game, one element of this game that I just didn't really think I was going to like. And so I never upgraded my pledge. I just kind of convinced myself to walk away from it. While we were sitting there Tuesday night playing the one game that we played, I actually got an alert through Kickstarter that they had announced a reprint and a small expansion, well, I say small, for Gilded Realms. And I thought, well, then I really better had play it here. I knew that it was in the library. It had just been added, and I wanted to be able to check it out to then decide, hey, now I know if I'm going to like it or not. Maybe I can go ahead and back it and still get a copy. Gilded Realms is a civilization-based game, and there is this idea that you're going to upgrade not just your civilization, but specific parts of your civilization and of your actual kingdom. So you have a weird large player board in front of you. You have a spot to store some cards, a spot to sort of manage a caravan. You have a spot to manage your armies. You have a spot to manage your current resources. You have a build track on the side, and you have these 5 cards in front of you that relate to specific aspects of your your realm, if you will. And so you've got I think it's like an inspiration card. You've got a resources card, an agricultural card, basically like a township card, and a military card. And you actually have a deck of these. You're going to start on level 0. You're going to get a starting quest. You're only going to get one quest of the whole game. That quest will give you your starting resources and let you flip one of those 5 kingdom cards over. So you'll start with level 1 on one of those 5 environments. And when you line these cards up, it makes this beautiful panoramic image of your kingdom, which is just really, really nice. You're then going to be getting these, I think they're called enhancements cards. I might be wrong on that term, but it's a large deck of cards that you're getting throughout the game. And these cards are two-ended, not two-sided, but two-ended. And so one end may give you a field symbol. Another one might give you a township symbol. The other one might give you, another card might give you a military on one end, a military unit on one end, and then a barracks upgrade on the other end. And you're going to start off with a number of these cards. And you're going to place them in this build query on the side of your board. You get to play 2 cards more or less for free, and then you can pay with your population to put more cards out. And then everything slides down 1 space. And any card that slides off the bottom, there's only 4 rows. Any card that slides off the bottom becomes built. You don't need any resources to build these cards, unless you want to build more than 2. And when they slide off, like I said, they go into your, they basically kind of become part of your inventory, become part of your kingdom. And if they are a military unit, well, then they go into your army. And if it's a building type, card, then it goes just off to the side in your tableau. And then when you have a certain number of these symbols ready, each of those 5 main cards has a cost on the bottom. It'll tell you how many of a certain symbol that you need, and that'll let you flip the card over or replace it with a new card. So again, your level 1 will go to a level 2, which is a new card. When you start to get up into level 3, there's going to be additional requirements. You're going to actually have to have some technologies in play. Each of those 5 environments of your kingdom have a number, I believe it's 4 different technologies that you can research. You can only have a maximum of 10. Most of these will require 2 technologies relevant to that card's type to then further upgrade it. And I think later on you need 3 to get into like level 4 or level 5, which means you cannot get everything up to that higher level anyways, because you're not going to be able to have that many technologies. And these technologies are kind of rule breakers. I had one, for example, that turned each of your active population into additional foot soldiers. Basically, you made your population into a trained militia that helped you with defense. And then I had one that, basically kind of gave me 1 book, 1 research of all the other cards. So it kind of helped me to get into some of those higher levels. Now, talking about military, talking about defense, why do you need that? Yes, you can attack other players, but it's really a very minor aspect of the game. That was one of the things I was concerned about, was having players attack you. No one actually went after me, but even when I went after another player, I did lose the fight, which wasn't really a big deal. And even had I won, I would have taken very, very little from him. You're basically just stealing some of these upgrade cards, but not the ones that you currently have in construction. You can sort of store extra cards in the corner of your board, and people can potentially steal those if they see something of interest, or if they really, really need a grain card, as Colin did, and just never managed to draw any, which was an issue with the game. He then went and attacked Katie and stole one of hers. Again, she didn't lose anything. She was working on other projects. That was just a card in storage, but gave him something that he needed to sort of, start working on growing his civilization. There's also a large board that sits in the middle of the table, and it is your timer. You're going to have a bunch of year 1 events. You're going to have a number of year 2 events based on the length of game you want to play. You can play in 9 rounds or 12, and those last 3 rounds can add a substantial amount of time. But these cards that you're putting on that board trigger end-of-year events, and a lot of them are attacks from a neutral external force. There will be military attacks, and they will attack all players equally. Now, there is this idea that at the end of your sort of preparation round, you have these really neat little plastic towers, and they have a little indicator on the bottom. You can kind of turn it in secret and place it face down so no one knows what you've chosen. And there is defense, offense, and basically like a resource or a worker symbol. And so you can decide whether you're going to use attack stance to attack another player or potentially attack a previous card that's been flipped up in that event board. You can take a defensive stance where you're sort of prepared for an attack, either from another player. Actually, I don't think it helps with other players, but it does help from those neutral attacks on the timer, on the the round tracker board. And then you can take that resource stance, which is going to help you get a couple of extra resources in between rounds. And if it is a sort of a pleasant year, you could say, if the event of this year is not a militant one, then you may have a prosperous year where you can actually get some extra resources if you chose that worker stance. And that was another element of the game that I was really nervous about, because there is this kind of, it's almost a coin flip. I think there's going to be an attack this round. I'm going to take the defensive stance, and instead it is a resource production round, and I'm not prepared for it, so my opponents are going to get something that I don't. However, it really did turn out to be pretty minor. I think the biggest benefit was if you prepared yourself for defense and you actually got attacked by one of these neutral opponents. Because in the very, very first round of the game, that's the card that came out. And not only was it attack, but it was a major attack. And we had to roll 2 dice, which made it even more powerful. I almost rolled the worst possible outcome, almost. And so we got slaughtered, all 4 of us. Got viciously attacked at the beginning of this game. Now, we didn't have a whole lot. You do have 6 population tokens. You can flip them over, essentially sort of killing one of your population to withstand 3 damage from this attack. And I think we had 12 damage that we had to weather. So you could flip over population tiles. You could spend your resources, basically, showing that they've been stolen from you. And you had to discard as much as you could to equal that attack value. And if you couldn't, then just any excess you ignored. But you never got completely knocked out. Rebuilding it from it was very, very difficult. Getting those population flipped back over was a lot of work. But we all got hammered at the same time, at the same level. None of us took a defensive stance. None of us were prepared for it. And it really did initially set a negative tone to the game. A lot of us were like, oh, sheesh, if that's how this is going to be terrible. But then none of the attacks were that bad again until later in the game, and then we were a bit more prepared for it. In fact, the last very nasty attack, I hardly took any damage whatsoever because I had that militia, I had built up my military a little bit, I was a little bit more prepared to take it on. And so again, that element wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, and ultimately, I enjoyed my play of this. There is a lot going on. I would say it's not as... Even with that randomness, even with a little bit of dice chucking, it's not as swingy as I kind of felt like Zoo Tycoon could be. Like I said, you're not going to be able to prepare for everything. You're going to get smacked from time to time. But the penalties don't really feel that bad. And even well before the second sort of half of the game, we had all recovered from that very bad initial attack. All of our population had been flipped back over. We had militaries. We had, all of our sort of different environments of this, of our kingdoms were starting to thrive and build up. We had technology. It was good. And our scores were very, very, very tight, as I recall. I think Katie actually won this game, which she was shocked by. And all of the rest of us were fairly close behind. It was a pretty, pretty tight game. And so I had a good time with this. And I've actually reached out to see if I can still get a copy of this. I do think I'm going to back the new Kickstarter campaign, get the new expansion for it. I don't know what it adds, but there is a big box edition that they've announced, which is going to give some better storage of all this stuff, because there's a fair amount of components in the game. I also like that there's a couple different cultures that you can play as. Mine even being a starting faction had a unique market board. Now, we did make the mistake in that there was so much to learn, so much to cover that we didn't really get into, okay, well, here's what your culture does, here's what my culture does. And they were minor things. It wasn't pages and pages of text to read. It wasn't necessarily a strong asymmetry. We all played the game the same, but I had an extra little deck of market cards that I could kind of interact with each round. There is also, and I haven't mentioned this, but all of the building, all of the card flipping, all of the gaining technologies and all that kind of stuff is simultaneous play. And so even with it being a big, heavy game, and it did take us several hours to play, but we saved a ton of time with the fact that a lot of this stuff we could just manage on our own, kind of do our own things. It didn't really feel like you had to monitor what everyone else was doing. You kind of have some confidence that it's kind of a hard game to what I would call accidentally cheat at. and I enjoyed it. Not everyone else around the table felt the same way. I think that I don't want to say that it feels obtuse, because I don't think that's the right word, But there is that swinginess of, okay, I really need some field cards. I just didn't get any. There is a way that you can get a sort of a wild card in play, but the resource you have to spend to get it in play was quite hard to come by. It's a gem that I didn't get until maybe the 4th or 5th round of this 9-round game, and I didn't get very many of them. So again, it was kind of difficult to rely on that to, get something that maybe you really needed. But ultimately, again, like I said, I did enjoy it. A pretty interesting game, Gilded Realms. All right, let me move on. Up next, we went a completely different way. We went very, very, very light, and we played Solar Gardens. I did not write down the name of the publisher or the designer of this. That's my mistake. But Solar Gardens is a very, very lightweight game of building more square tiles. Basically, what you're doing is you're building a garden on the top of a skyscraper building. And you're going to have exactly 16 turns. You're playing into a 4x4 grid. You're going to cover that space. It did have some forgiving rules in the fact that when you're drafting a tile, you can place it anywhere. You don't have to place it adjacent to something you already have in play. But the way that you got these tiles was a little swingy. It was a sort of a push your luck drafting mechanism. So you're going to have a first player in each round that just passes clockwise around the game. That person's going to draw a number of tiles equal to the number of players plus 1. We had a 4-player game. And so we would always have 5 tiles. That player flips over the top tile, looks at it, decides that they want it. If not, they pass it on. And that decision continues to get made until it gets to the last player, who can choose to discard it or play it. But if they discard it, then they're going to have to take the next tile that comes at them because, of course, there's only 1 spare tile in each round. These tiles have a couple of symbols on them. You can have what I thought was the most boring and inaccurate looking wind farm I've ever seen. There were little tiny solar panels. There were flower gardens. There were pathways. And there were like pet houses that didn't look almost anything like a pet house. I think there might have been one other symbol that I'm forgetting. But the solar panels, each column of your player board, which I say column, the whole board was kind of rotated 45 degrees. So each column had a number of solar panels that it had to have in it. Each row had a certain number of wind farms it had to have in it. You'd have a 1, 2, 3, and a 4 row. Then you had this idea that any animal houses that were adjacent to each other on different tiles would score a bonus point. And if you had one of every animal tile, you would get a couple of bonus points. The pathways, you had to try and connect to each other. You didn't have to, but you wanted to try to connect the pathways because at the end of the game, you were going to score a point for every path or every tile on the longest path you had, and then the player with the longest path would score some extra points. And by now, this is probably starting to sound very Carcassonne-like, and if it doesn't, then I'll tell you about the flower tiles that had these, just sort of rows of flowers printed on them, and then some of them would have a little watering station, like a hydroponic station or something like that. And you were going to score a point for every garden tile in an enclosed garden. You had a little fence around them. The outer perimeters of your board had a fence around it. And so you had to completely enclose a garden. You had to have at least 1 hydroponics thing on it to score a point per tile. And if you managed to have 2 hydroponic symbols, you would score double. And if that doesn't sound like the city tiles in Carcassonne, then you've probably never played Carcassonne. Because it was almost word for word the same scoring system, with the exception that, so in Carcassonne you had the city tiles and they had little shields on them, little crests. You didn't have to have the crest, but if you did, then it would double the scoring of that city. In Solar Gardens, you had to have at least 1 of those, and you had to have 2 of them to double the scoring of the garden. Other than that, exactly the same. And that's really the whole game. You're drafting these tiles, really hoping you're going to get a good one, really hoping you can put it into a place that's going to score a lot of stuff for you. Although in most cases, as we all certainly ran into, you get your last tile and it doesn't fit at all. Everything that you've been trying to build up just completely falls apart. Very much like Azul, very much like Calico, very much like all these games that kind of rely on this pure dumb luck of the things you need coming up when you need them. And so as a result, I did not care for this at all. Way too random, way too swingy. The whole just drafting aspect of every player looking at that tile and deciding, well, do I want this? Is it good enough to take? Do I want to maybe wait and see what else is going to come down the pipe? Just made this drag on far longer than I ever have cared to play. And so I was quite happy when our game of Solar Gardens came to an end. Up next, and this is the last game for Wednesday that I will mention, but first I will introduce Omar Hernandez. Omar has been a fan and a follower of Tabletop Toolbox for some time now, and he actually reached out to me before the retreat and said, hey, can you bring down Adulthood? He had wanted to check this one out. He knew of the Pursuit of Happiness game, which you might be hearing about maybe in the next episode. But he wanted to check this one out as well. Now, I've talked about this game a good bit here in the channel. Of course, I did a playthrough here in the channel. You can certainly go and check that out. Omar showed us how to break this game. I have never, one of the comments I've made about Adulthood was that it always felt a little too long to me. It says 45 minutes. I've never been able to play it at less than like an hour and a half. Even our playthrough on the channel was an hour and 15. Now that was with us kind of narrating our turns a little bit more. But that was also because I edited it down from 2 hours in length. Omar knocked us out in 45 minutes. He had an engine unlike anything I'd ever seen in Adulthood, and he clobbered us, hitting the 26-point value and eventually going up to over 50 points after endgame scoring. Colin and Greg, who I also played with, they were in the 20s, and I had 15 points. I had never seen that sort of disparity in scores before. And of course, I was a little grumpy, somewhat understandably, but I was not as much grumpy because of just how well he was doing, although we were all a little bit like, geez, man, calm down. But also the fact that because it went so quickly, we never really got to enjoy that emergent story. We never really got to tell much of a story of moving on from one partner to the next, moving on from one career to the next, getting tired of the Mall Walker Club and going and joining a board gaming club and getting to tell that player-driven story. It really just didn't get to happen because of how quickly we got through this game. The only thing that was kind of funny at the end was that Omar's career was a therapist. He was a therapist, and I needed some therapy at that point. But then he got an animal. He got a pet, and it was a therapy dog. And we thought, that's hysterical. You're a therapist with a therapy dog. Except then he hit a threshold in the scoring where he had to draw a life event, and the life event was a layoff card. He lost his job, got a couple of bucks in severance. I was no longer a therapist. And we quickly started joking. Well, let me guess. You took your therapy dog into work and it bit one of your clients, and now you're out of a job. Ha ha. And so that was really kind of all we got out of it. But we did have a lot of laughs afterwards, talking about just how much better of an adult Omar was than all of us. And so it was, it may not have been my favorite playthrough, but it was still certainly a memorable event. That was the end of Wednesday. I got into some pretty interesting games on Thursday. Luckily, I didn't stay up that late on Wednesday, so I was able to get in fairly early on Thursday and didn't see any immediate friends sort of walking around, so I grabbed a game off the shelf, one that has had my interest for a little while. This is Evenfall, or Evenfall. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce this one, but this is a game that had sort of been on my radar for no other reason than how it looks. It's a really, really striking cover, and it just looked really interesting. It has a decent scoring out on BGG, and I knew that it kind of had a tableau building, engine building type of game, not even too dissimilar from that of, say, Adulthood. I grabbed this, I sat down with the flags. The dice tower has two different sets of flags. You can use green if you're looking for players, and yellow if you're looking for a teach. I got players pretty quick. I never got anyone down to help us teach, so I just kind of ran through the rule book and learned as we went. This is a game, it's a difficult game to kind of describe, but basically you're running a coven. You're running a group of witches and sort of dark spirits, and nothing in the game really gets too funky, but I did, for example, build a gateway to hell at some point. You have this vertical board in front of you, and it has this idea that on the top right is where you're going to place your outer circle cards, and the bottom right is your inner circle. And cards throughout the game will sort of upgrade from the outer circle to your inner circle. You can also place specialists to the left side of your player board, and then you can play, I think it was called council members, that tuck under the bottom of your card or under the bottom of your board, and most of those are going to give you end of round effects or end of game scoring. You've got these 3 boards on the table. I can't remember what they were called, but they're kind of like locations, and you can send your witches. You're going to have 4 witches, basically a worker placement system. You can place your witches out there to then take these location cards that are just randomly dealt out to each of these locations, or you can conduct sort of little rituals there, which are just simple things that are basically going to let you maybe trade in a resource to get other resources, trade in cards to get resources, so on and so forth. Just little actions that are going to kind of help you build your engine throughout the game. You can also place witches. What you're also going to be able to do is you're going to have a hand of cards that you're going to get at the beginning of each round, and they're going to give you a wide variety of things. They're going to represent those specialists and those council members, but they're also going to give you artifacts that you can play on these locations. And they come in a variety. I can't remember what they're all called, but you could have, familiars. You could have, unique kind of things that you were placing on these cards. And some of them just gave you a one-time effect. Some of them gave you an ongoing effect. Some of them gave you an actual worker placement spot for your witches if they were in the outer circle. And if those cards ever slid down, then you could also use your elders. But your elders could only go and work in your inner circle. They could never go out onto the main boards. And so there was this sort of interesting idea in that, okay, well, I want to do stuff out here in the main board with my witches, but I also want to be able to activate some of these special cards that I built, but I don't want to waste my witches on those. I want to go ahead and get these cards moved down to my inner circle so I can use my elders. But then you can also harvest the locations that were in your inner circle. You could not harvest the ones in your outer circle. You couldn't harvest the ones in your inner circle. And so there was this, sort of internal tug of war as you were trying to figure out when was the best time to move these cards down, knowing that you're going to be able to work them more frequently, but not harvest their resources. And there was a lot of engine building in that too. So I had a card that said, anytime I took one of these location cards, I could harvest it immediately, potentially letting me double harvest those in each round, because you can only make a harvest action once per round of the game. And there's only 3 rounds in the entire game. I also had some specialists that were going to let me... I can't remember everything I was able to do. I had a lot of transmutation abilities. I was able to get extra resources out of things. I also had a really, really nice card, if I recall, that was going to let me trigger something for a second time. Oh, that's right. There was a coven track on the left side of your board, and as you went up that track, you would get certain bonuses, and I had an action that basically said, move up that track and double your rewards. And so I was actually using it for every point. Every time there was a point bonus, I would use that to double my points. And then there was also there was this idea of getting mana, and I'm even trying to remember exactly how it worked. I do remember how it worked. Each of these boards out on the middle of the table, you then sort of did an area control battle. You never knew who your enemy was, but you were fighting against sort of an invisible foe. And you were going to spend your mana at the end of each round to try and win these 3 independent battles on these 3 boards. And if you contributed a certain amount of hit points, you were going to get a bonus, and everybody got that bonus. But the player who contributed the most hit points would get a special token from that board that would then go onto their location cards that would double its potential endgame scoring. And all this really was pretty neat. There was a lot of difficult decisions to make. There was a lot of turn efficiency. Okay, I can do this, but if I do this first, then I'll be able to double that reward, or maybe be able to kind of, grab this one more time before it moves down. There was a lot of intricate timing in how everything went off. A couple of these cards, your specialists and your council members were the same card, and so it mattered where you placed it, sort of how you wanted to get that card into play would change what it did for you, right? And so I really, really enjoyed the gameplay of this. The one player just clobbered us in endgame scoring. None of us quite saw that many points coming. But I really did like the system. For me, I just didn't really think a lot of my friends, and especially my family, were going to like that theming. Again, the gateway to hell. And again, it wasn't really macabre. None of it was gruesome or anything like that. But it was still just just enough, I think, left field that I didn't think my wife would enjoy it. And I definitely don't think that my friends like Daniel and such would really get into it. I had a chance to get this game fairly cheap at the retreat, decided not to do it, but I did like it. And so if that theme is less of a concern for you, I do think it's a fun system. The person who was selling the game did say that it kind of gets samey after a little while. There's not really a lot that's going to change from game to game, but certainly your engine could. There was a fairly big deck of cards that you were going to be drafting. And so I think that you'd have to probably play this a couple times before it would start to get repetitive, but I could see that being a possibility. Anyways, that was Evenfall, a pretty neat game. We played a couple other things throughout the day, but towards the end of that day, we did play a game of Tenpenny Parks. I sat down with Colin and my good friend Alex Marks. Alex lives north of Miami, and he is a marine biologist who actually has contributed to the game of Finspan. He was kind of brought in as just a consultant to help out with the development of that game. I've known him for a good number of years and just a good buddy of mine, but we sat down to play Tenpenny Parks. Now, I've talked about Tenpenny Parks before. I'm not really going to get into the gameplay, but what I do love about this game is when you teach it. One of my favorite things to do with this game is teaching, okay, we're going to be building these amusement parks. You're going to be going and putting concession stands and fun rides and exciting, thrilling things and what looks like this neat polyomino placement game. You got to place around these trees and maybe cut down trees. But of course, the tiles can never touch each other. And it's that moment that everyone at the table goes, wait, what? And you have to suddenly realize, okay, you're going to play with blockus rules where you can only touch on corners. If you touch other tiles at all, you can just kind of completely build apart from each other. And that really always throws players off. And I always get amused when I watch players and they're putting tiles down and then they realize, oh, geez, I put it right next to that bonus space, and I'm not going to be able to clean that bonus space because I can't put another tile there because it's going to touch this tile. Or they go and they cut down trees, and then they place tiles and realize, I didn't need to cut down that tree at all. That tree could have stayed there. I wasted that turn. And that is where I have a ton of fun with this game. I've obviously played it enough times that I can see those challenges. I can sort of work my way around those puzzles. And even a couple of the players were lamenting towards the end of the game, Jeff's never cut down a single tree. I'm like, no, I know better. And so I kind of clobbered my buddies in this one, but I have a ton of experience with this game. One of my favorites, Tenpenny Parks. Then we got a little later into the evening. Really last year is probably the first time that I joined up with my buddy Colin, who I've mentioned, and a couple other people who I met for the first time. Some of them weren't there this year, unfortunately. And we got into what I started calling the dumb hour. The hour of at this point it's 11:30, maybe midnight, maybe even later. And people start to get some really dumb games off the shelf. I sat down. This game was already in session, and I literally just sat down. They said, just join us. Here's a piece. Start playing. Of a game called Fluff. And one of the people at the table was Rochelle Crane. I had an absolute blast playing this game with Rochelle. And because it was called Fluff, you can only imagine some of the inappropriate language that started to come out of this game. And it was from all of us. Just, I'm going to fluff you up. Go fluff yourself. Man, you're just fluffing everybody here at the table. Just... But this is a twist on Liar's Dice. Now, I've never played Liar's Dice myself, but Liar's Dice and Fluff is a game where you're going to have a couple of dice. You're going to roll them sort of secretly. You have these little plastic containers, and then one player is going to sort of make a wager. And they may say something like 3 5s. I think there are 3 5s across all of our dice currently in play. The next person has a choice. They can up one of those numbers. So they can say, no, I think there's 3 6s, or they can say, I think there's 4 5s. If you increase the quantity, you can decrease the face value. I should also mention that I have no idea if these rules are actually correct. That's how I was taught them. And even Colin, who had sort of taught the game, confessed that the rules weren't super duper duper clear, and he kind of just glazed over them anyways. But if someone said 3 5s, you could say, no, I think there's actually 6 4s. You're gleaming this information somewhat from what other people are saying, and then, of course, also what you have in front of you, trying to take into consideration that in this game, unlike Liar's Dice, you have a wild symbol. So basically the ones on each die are replaced with a animal-type symbol, and they act as a wild. So if you have 4 6s and one of these wilds, you actually have 5 sixes. You each only have 5 dice. So that would be highly, highly unlikely. And so you're trying to consider what you have plus maybe how many wilds might be around the table. Now, if someone rattles off a wager that you just think is absolutely impossible, I think there's 8 4s. And you think, look, they've already lost some dice. There's only 3 of us playing. There's no way there's 8 4s. And you call Fluff. And at that moment, everyone reveals their cup of dice. You're going to total up the number of 4s plus any wilds. And if the person who called Fluff is correct, then the person who made a wager loses a die. But if that wager is in fact correct, and there are more or equal to 8 of, whatever that number was, then the person who called Fluff loses 2 dice. And you simply play until only one person has any dice remaining. This game, the first round of it, like I said, I walked into a round. I really didn't understand it. I lost. I was almost out immediately. I walked in the middle of an in-progress game and was still one of the first persons out from the game. We then immediately set up and played another round because it takes 3 seconds to reset for this game. And then I was actually down to the second to last player, and Rochelle actually won. We had 1 die left. She was actually getting into the habit of not even looking. She'd just roll and go, I think there's a 6. And I didn't note if she had actually looked at her cup or not. So I thought maybe she had just guessed. And there was, of course, only a 12% chance that she was right. I called Fluff. She actually had looked at her cup, and she won. I had so much fun playing this absolutely ridiculous, stupid game that I ordered a copy. The biggest bummer is this game is out of print. This was like $30 shipped. I had to buy it off of eBay. It's a 4-player game. You can see the 4 pucks here with dice in them, but the dice tower somehow had a 5th player in white. This copy doesn't have that. And so I'm either going to have to maybe grab a second copy at some point, because I could see myself taking this to our mug club night at the Origin Brewery here in town and playing this with some friends, because there's not a lot of strategy to this. It's not a gamer's game by any means, and I think we can have a lot of fun with it. Of course, all of us shouting Fluff in a brewery will be a huge hoot, but I could also see us having more than 4 players. So I'm either going to have to go and buy another copy, because you don't actually need the player colors, or I'm going to have to go and 3D print some pieces and get some custom dice, but usually you get dice with custom 6s instead of custom 1s. So I would have to replace all the dice in this game. Don't know which route I'll go with that. If it takes off with my friends, I'll worry about it then. But here is Fluff. We played one last game on Thursday after we went through Fluff. I don't even know how to pronounce this. It is Arbos Apfel. It is a German dexterity game where you're building a little apple tree or maybe a cherry tree. I think it's an apple tree, Arbos Apfel. And I forgot about this game. I played it for the first time last year at the retreat. They broke it out when we were doing the game exchange because it's so mindless. You can just sit there and kind of play it while you're listening for your name to get called. And Colin said, well, hey, how about I go grab us a quick dexterity game? And I said, yeah, sure, okay, fine, whatever. And he brought it back to the table, and I was like, no, not this one. All you have are these little wooden leaves, little wooden bark, tree branch pieces with little pegs on one end and holes on the other end and maybe a couple of holes at an angle on the side. And you see this game and you think, oh, this will be easy. I'm just going to build a tree. And there's a little deck of cards. You flip over the card and it says, place 2 leaves, place 1 stick. There are some dumb ones like swap all your leaves with the player on your left or, take 2 pieces back off the tree. Those ones suck. But then you quickly realize that none of these pegs actually fit in the holes. The holes are much larger in diameter than the pegs. And so you put a piece of branch in and then it immediately starts to sag and just falls right back out. You're trying to you had this idea that I can build branches out the side, but you only build 2 branches and then nothing's actually going to stay in the ends of these little pieces of tree. It's almost like this thing was built by a blind man in a garage somewhere. I hate this game. I've never played it with anyone who liked this game. And that's the part of it that Colin loves so much because he kept joking throughout the whole weekend that he loves seeing people go into this with, optimism. This is going to be great. We're going to play a little tree building game. And then a few turns in, they realize this thing doesn't work at all. This game is terrible. I'm trying to put 1 piece in. 4 pieces fall off. I now have to take all those pieces, and that ends my turn. We got a couple rounds in. Rochelle was still with us. physically. She was no longer with us mentally because she decided, no, I'm going to start changing the rules. The rules are now just trying to get every one of your pieces on the tree. And she's sitting there and she's trying to put a branch on. 4 pieces fall off and she just whacked this thing across the table. And I was so upset, not because she knocked it over, but because I didn't get to do it myself. But it completely broke her. It was the funniest thing I had ever seen. We were laughing so hard between Fluff and this game that I had a splitting headache by then. We did play one other game that night that is barely even noteworthy. I'll cover it in the next episode. And then we went to bed. I think it was about 2:30 in the morning. Okay, Friday, after obviously a bit of a late night and trying to at least get a little bit of sleep in the morning, I stumbled back into the game room. I did quickly run into a good buddy, Jason Matthew. Jason has been an avid supporter of myself on the Dice Tower and on this channel. He's a great guy to hang out with. Absolutely love his sense of humor as well. But he grabbed a copy of Orbit off of the library shelves, and we sat down on this. Now, real quick, Orbit is from Dr. Reiner Knizia. I do have a copy of this game coming. It just hasn't arrived yet. The Dice Tower has an early copy of it. But this is a game, a very, very simple game, where you're simply trying to visit all of these planets. There are, I believe, 8 or 9 different planets in the game. And you're going to have a planet of your player color. So there's red, yellow, blue, green, and I think it was just it. Red, yellow, blue, green. There's also a purple planet. There's a black planet. There's an orange planet. There might be one or more others. When you go to the red, yellow, blue, or green, when you go to any of them that is not your player color, nothing happens. You just, okay, I've now visited that planet. You kind of pop it off of your player board. You have a little wooden token that sort of indicates which planets you still have to go to. But when you go to the black or the purple or the orange, you're going to get a small benefit. Those benefits might be some extra battery power. Battery power can give you some a little extra movement. One of them gives you like a teleport ability. You can sort of jump to one of these wormholes across the board. But all these planets, and in fact this entire board, is arranged in a triangular pattern. So every triangular space, every spot where these triangles kind of come together is a point, and there's a point you can either move to or where a planet will move to. You can move to any space. And these planets are going to follow these paths across this board, and they're going to feature various orbits. Now, they're not going to be a perfectly round orbit or even a hexagonal orbit. They're going to kind of have a crazy pattern, but you're going to often be able to sort of jump off of one planet, maybe move a couple of spaces and get on the next planet. And there are, just like the game of Wormholes by AEG, there are other sort of things that you can trigger to quickly jump yourself around different spots. And so even though this was a large board, and it did seem like a daunting amount of space literally to cover, it was actually pretty easy to move yourself around. Now, you move by playing cards. You're going to have a small hand of cards that you can increase in size throughout the game, either by visiting a certain planet or by picking up these little tokens scattered across the board that will give you that ability. And the cards are going to give you an amount of movement, and usually at least one planet, and sometimes an additional benefit like extra energy production. You can trigger any of those bonuses or any of those actions in any order that you want. So you might move a planet first, then move yourself the couple of spaces that the card provides. You can spend energy to have extra movement. And then, like I said, if there's a battery icon on the card, you can charge your battery up a little bit and move even further. You can only hold so much energy, however, of those battery symbols, but you can increase your energy capacity, again, by visiting a certain planet or by grabbing these upgrade tokens off the board. And that's the whole game. That's basically it. There's a couple other little things, like you can actually reverse the orbit path of a planet, which was a little crazy. There were some extra little abilities or tokens you can kind of pick up along the way. You could kind of rapid charge your battery, little things like that. But the whole idea was simply race to get around and visit every planet and then get back to your home planet before anyone else gets back to theirs. First person to do so immediately wins the game. This was, honestly, it was a fun game. But the only caveat being, especially towards the end, if you're sort of, I've got one more planet to go to, or especially if you have visited all the planets, all you need to do is get home, every player around the table is now working against you, and they will constantly try to thwart what you needed to do. And in fact, on one turn, I had all the planets. I needed to get home. I was on the orbit path of my planet, and I was on the next stop. There are these tokens that you might be able to play, which actually make a planet skip one of its destinations. But if a player is there, you can't play it there. And so literally, I just needed that blue planet to move one more space, and I was going to be home, and I would have finished the game. And so, of course, on her turn, Katie plays a card that flips the orbit of the blue planet. So it was going to set head away from me, and I didn't have anything in my hand to let me affect any direction of a planet or the blue planet at all. So I was really kind of hung out to dry. And then on my next turn, I was actually one battery symbol away from being able to get to the blue planet anyways. And so I just could not get there. And Katie won the game on her next turn. And so it was a little kind of a bit of a bummer, like, I'm just so close. And now, of course, like I said, everyone's working against you. And so it's not only you against the game, it's you against all your fellow players, which was a bit of a bummer, but that's obviously how this kind of a game is going to go. But we did really enjoy it. It's a very simple game to teach. It is a beautiful game on the table. It felt to me very similar to the game of Wormholes, a game where you felt like you have so much to do and it's going to be almost impossible to pull it off. And yet you're flying all over the place with relative ease. And that was a lot of fun. Trying to find the convergent paths between these planets, trying to quickly kind of leapfrog from one to the next. Also, these little ships can occupy the same space. And Jason and I kept going different paths only to then come back. Like we were basically trying to get to the same planets turn after turn after turn. And so we constantly kept finding ourselves back on top of each other and just having a lot of laughs about that. I enjoyed this. I don't know that it's a game that's going to get a ton of plays around here, but I will definitely play my copy. I'm looking forward to it showing up. That was Orbit. The next two games I'll cover very quickly because I've talked about them many times before, but I actually taught 2 games of Bomb Busters at the retreat. And each time that we played it, we played a couple of rounds. And I have found, and I think I mentioned it even in a previous episode, that Mission 2 is a really good mission to start with if you're playing with people who are familiar with deduction cooperative games. If no one has any idea how to even handle a deduction game, then you better start with Mission 1. But Mission 2 does jump up the difficulty fairly quick, so that's a good starting point. And then you can either go to Missions 3 or 4 to sort of introduce the remaining concepts of the game. And even from there, you could, if you wanted to, jump all the way up to the exam, which I think is mission number 7. But no one got beyond that. And in fact, in both times, I think we failed mission 3 or 4. Would often then try it right away again and succeed, and then everyone usually was kind of done with it by then. But got to play a couple games of Bomb Busters, and then lastly, the actual last game I played on the Saturday night, we're in the Saturday now, was Tacta. And I've talked about this one before, just a fun card-playing game. I played this with Katie and Greg and our friend Eric Johnson, who I'll talk about some more in the next episode. But we got to play a game of Tacta, and I walloped all of them. So that was fun. That is the end of this episode of the Dice Tower Retreat. I do still have, like I said, a good 12 more games to go. I haven't decided if that's going to be episode number 76 or 75.5, but keep your eyes out, and I will talk about those soon. Hey, real quick to end out this episode, I am going to go ahead and do a regular episode next week with a question of the week. So my question for next week is, have you ever learned the rules to a board game and then never played it? That happens a good bit, especially at events like the retreat. You might go into an event like this, okay, I'm going to try and get this game to the table. I'm going to go ahead and learn it ahead of time. And then either I can't find anyone to play it, or I just never get around to playing it. It also happens a lot for me if a game night kind of suddenly gets canceled, or maybe I think we're going to play something this weekend and all of a sudden something new delivers. We play that instead. It happens to me all the time. I'm curious if it's ever happened to you. That is it for episode number 75. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, plenty more games, including some big new hits like Luthier, are coming soon. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.